Today I want to talk about my worst ever property purchase and 3 big lessons that I essentially learnt from buying this property that I think are of real value to everyone. Now the property I bought back when I was 19. While this sounds impressive, the property I purchased was just 135,000. Now for those of you going, well, that was basically the Stone Age, the reality is you can still buy units in regional Australia, in Cairns in particular, for around 150,000. So you too can buy a truly terrible deal. I joke. But I do want to highlight that there is still these cheap units, and some of these units do turn into really good deals. Unfortunately, the way this deal played out for me, it wasn't the case. But as the story goes on, you'll see that maybe it could have been a much better deal if I'd played it slightly differently. So I bought the unit in 2010 for 135,000. Back then they had the first homeowners grant, which was around 7,000, and I think I saved only about $8,000 to put towards the deposit. I lived in the property for about a year before I moved out and rented the property out for the remaining 9 years that I owned that property. I then went on and sold the property in 2020 for a massive 148,000. So that's right, it went up $13,000 in 10 years, which by anyone's books is pretty rubbish. It's about $1,300 a year, which as an investment is pretty poor. But however, there was 3 big lessons I learned out of buying this property that I do want to share with you. The first big lesson is if you're paying principal and interest on your loan, it is a fantastic way to be forced to save money. Essentially, when I first bought that property, it had a loan of about 128,000 tied up against it. And over the 10 years I owned it, that loan got paid down a considerable amount. And when we sold it for 148,000 in 2020, we walked away with just over 60,000 in our pocket. That 60,000 would have been extremely hard to save and is the equivalent of saving 6,000 a year over that 10-year period. And that 60,000 really set us up to go and buy a home that we really had our heart set on and something that we really consider as sort of our forever home. So without paying principal and interest and paying down that loan over that period of time, I personally don't think we would have saved ourselves to that sort of deposit for that property. So paying principal and interest, and especially having that property as an investment, essentially the tenant was paying the principal and interest off for us, and that really put us in a good position when we went on to sell the property. So that's the big first lesson, that principal and interest really is such a great way to be forced to save money. My second big lesson here is time in the market is better than timing the market. If you look historically at property prices over the years, they have continued to climb upwards and upwards over the last 100 years here in Australia, and I don't think that trend is going to change anytime soon. As much as we bought that property in a really flat market and didn't see any real growth over that 10-year period, we sold that property for 148,000, and just 2 years later, a unit in that same complex just sold for 229,000. So that we could have made an extra 80,000 on that unit if we'd held on another 2 years. Fortunately, we did take the money out of that property and invested it locally in the same market, so we did see the benefit of those market increases. But it does tickle and hurt a little bit to know that if we just held on 2 years longer with that property, that we would have made an extra 80,000 from it. So that's where those cheap units that are still available today for 150,000, for around that mark, there is very good chance that you'll see continued growth. And just because historically for the last 10 years it has been flat up until recently, doesn't mean that the next 10 years are going to be the same way. So I really believe that time in the market is a lot more important than trying to time the market. My third big lesson from this property is that your first home doesn't need to be your forever home. Now this property I bought when I was 19. I had really no intentions of living in the property for a long time, but it did seem like a great opportunity to enter the market at a very reasonable price point. And I very much believe these opportunities still exist today, be it a $150,000 unit or a $400,000 house. These properties don't need to be your forever property. They don't have to be that desirable home that ticks all the boxes. But I think if you can enter into the market sooner at a reasonable price point, I think you are better off doing so. Essentially, as you own that property, paying principal and interest down, seeing a bit of market rise, very quickly you may be in a position within 3, 4, 5 years of releasing that property, reaccessing equity or selling it, and using those funds for that deposit for your forever home. For us, it was 10 years between buying that first property and then buying that property that we really fell in love with. But that 10 years, that property, the paying off the principal and interest, really set us up in a way that savings would have been quite a challenge and quite a sacrifice to achieve. So there you have it. That's my worst ever deal in real estate, and 3 big lessons I learnt from it, and 3 big ways that property sort of very much helped me set me up into where we are today. I hope this video is of value. If you have enjoyed it, make sure to give it a like. Maybe there's someone out there that this video could be of value to as well, so make sure you give it a share, and thank you so much for watching.